I need to tell you something about Scorpio energy that most people completely misunderstand. And I'm not talking about the surface-level descriptions you find in generic horoscope columns. What I'm about to share with you is the result of decades of psychological observation, energy work, and direct experience with this most misunderstood sign of the zodiac. Right now, as you're reading this, there's a good chance you've encountered Scorpio energy recently. Maybe you felt it in someone's gaze that seemed to penetrate straight through your carefully constructed social mask. Perhaps you noticed an inexplicable tension in a room when a certain person entered. Or maybe you've experienced the peculiar sensation of being simultaneously attracted and slightly unnerved by someone's presence. That's Scorpio energy. And if you've felt it, you already know on a visceral level that something profound is happening beneath the surface. Here's what most astrology content gets wrong about Scorpio. They focus on the stereotypes, the jealousy, the vindictiveness, the sexual intensity. And yes, those elements exist, but they're merely symptoms of something far more fundamental. Scorpio isn't intense because they choose to be dramatic. Scorpio is intense because they exist at a frequency that most human beings can only access during the most transformative moments of their lives. Birth, death, deep trauma, profound love, spiritual awakening. These are the territories where Scorpio lives permanently. Let me be extremely clear about something. When I say Scorpio possesses power, I'm not talking about the loud, obvious power of fire signs or the commanding presence of cardinal signs. Scorpio's power is the power of the surgeon's scalpel, not the warrior's sword. It's the power of plutonium, not dynamite. It's concentrated, controlled, and capable of chain reactions that can alter entire systems from within. Have you noticed how certain people seem to know things about you that you never told them? How they respond to the truth you're hiding rather than the story you're telling? That's Scorpio's primary gift and their primary burden. They see what's real, not what's presented, not what's performed, what's actually true. And this ability isn't mystical or supernatural. It's the result of an almost pathological attention to micro-expressions, energy shifts, tonal variations, and the 1,000 tiny inconsistencies that reveal when someone is operating from their authentic self versus their protective persona. This is why Scorpios are often described as intimidating even when they're being perfectly pleasant. Because on a subconscious level, people recognize that they're being seen, truly seen. And for most people, being truly seen is terrifying. We spend enormous amounts of energy constructing and maintaining our social identities, our acceptable selves, our likable versions. And Scorpio energy cuts through all of that construction like it's tissue paper. But here's where it gets psychologically fascinating. Scorpio doesn't just see through others. They're equally, if not more, ruthless with themselves. This is the scene associated with death and rebirth for a reason. Scorpios undergo more complete psychological deaths and reconstructions in one lifetime than most signs experience in several. They don't just change. They don't just grow. They completely dismantle who they were and rebuild from the foundation up. Multiple times. Think about what that actually means on a practical level. Imagine having the courage to look at every single belief you hold, every pattern you run, every defense mechanism you've constructed, and ask yourself with brutal honesty whether it's actually serving you or whether it's just protecting you from growth. Most people can't do this once in their entire lives. Scorpios do it as a regular practice, not because they're masochistic, but because they have an almost cellular understanding that stagnation equals death. This brings us to one of the most misunderstood aspects of Scorpio energy: the obsession, the intensity, the all-or-nothing approach to everything they do. People often frame this as a negative trait, as if Scorpios should somehow learn to be more casual, more detached, more moderate. But this completely misses the point of what's actually happening. Scorpio's intensity isn't a personality flaw, it's a strategic necessity. When you're operating at the depth that Scorpio naturally inhabits, you can't afford to be superficial. You can't afford to scatter your energy across multiple shallow pursuits. Because the work Scorpio is here to do, both for themselves and for others, requires complete commitment. You cannot transform something you're only partially engaged with. You cannot heal what you're unwilling to fully feel. You cannot access truth while maintaining comfortable distance. Let me give you a concrete example of how this plays out. When a Scorpio decides to learn something, they don't just take a class or read a book. They become consumed by the subject. They research obsessively. They practice relentlessly. They seek out the deepest, most complex aspects of the topic. They want to understand not just how something works, but why it works, what it means, and how it connects to everything else. This isn't casual interest. This is the approach of someone who understands that surface-level knowledge is essentially useless for the kind of transformation they're seeking. The same pattern applies to relationships. When Scorpio loves, they don't love casually. They don't love partially. They love with an intensity that can be overwhelming for people who aren't prepared for that level of emotional depth. And this is where Scorpio often gets hurt. Because they give this profound, transformative love to people who are still operating at a much more superficial level of emotional engagement. Does this resonate with you? Have you ever experienced the confusion of offering someone your complete authentic self, only to realize they were only interested in a pleasant, manageable version of you? This is the Scorpio wound. The recognition that most people don't actually want depth. They want comfort. They want predictability. They want relationships that don't challenge them to grow or change or face their own shadows. And for Scorpio, this kind of relationship feels like slow suffocation. But here's what's crucial to understand. Scorpio's intensity isn't just about emotional depth. It's about power dynamics. And this is where we need to talk about something that makes people uncomfortable. Scorpio is the sign most associated with power, control, and domination. Not in the obvious, tyrannical sense, but in the subtle, psychological sense. Scorpios understand power. They understand how it flows, how it's accumulated, how it's wielded, how it's hidden. They understand that real power isn't about being the loudest person in the room or having the most impressive title. Real power is about understanding what motivates people, what they fear, what they desire, and how to position yourself strategically within those dynamics. This is why Scorpios often end up in positions of significant influence even when they're not seeking leadership roles. They naturally gravitate toward the levers of power within any system. They identify the real decision makers, the hidden hierarchies, the unspoken rules, and they position themselves accordingly. Now, this can manifest in healthy or unhealthy ways. A healthy Scorpio uses this understanding of power dynamics to create positive change, to protect the vulnerable, to expose corruption, to facilitate deep healing. An unhealthy Scorpio uses this same understanding to manipulate, control, and dominate others for personal gain. And here's the uncomfortable truth that we need to acknowledge. Every Scorpio has the capacity for both. The same psychological tools that make someone an incredible therapist, investigator, or transformational leader can also make them a master manipulator. The same ability to see through people's defenses can be used to help them heal or to exploit their vulnerabilities. This is why Scorpio is associated with both the eagle and the scorpion. The eagle represents the evolved Scorpio who has learned to use their power for transcendence and healing. The scorpion represents the unevolved Scorpio who uses their power destructively, often hurting themselves in the process. But rather than saying Scorpios are good or bad, it's better to say that Scorpios are powerful, and power is neutral. It's the intention and consciousness behind the power that determines whether it becomes a force for transformation or destruction. Let me share something that might surprise you. The Scorpios who appear most dangerous, most intimidating, most intense on the surface are often not the ones you need to worry about. Those Scorpios are showing you their power openly. They're being transparent about their intensity. The Scorpios you need to be cautious around are the ones who have learned to completely master their power. The ones who appear gentle, accommodating, even weak. Because they've learned that invisible power is far more effective than obvious power. This is the Scorpio strategy. Never reveal your full capacity. Never show all your cards. Maintain mystery not for the sake of being mysterious, but because information asymmetry is a form of power. When people don't fully understand what you're capable of, they can't effectively defend against you or limit you. Have you noticed this pattern? How the most powerful Scorpios you know often seem almost understated in their presentation. How they let others underestimate them, only to reveal their true capacity at the most strategically advantageous moment. This brings us to another crucial aspect of Scorpio energy that's often overlooked. The relationship with secrets. Scorpios are natural secret keepers, not because they're inherently deceptive, but because they understand the power of hidden information. They understand that what's concealed often has more influence than what's revealed. Think about how this operates in practice. A Scorpio will often know significantly more about a situation than they let on. They'll gather information quietly, observe patterns, connect dots that others miss, and they'll hold this knowledge close, revealing it only when doing so serves a strategic purpose. This isn't about being manipulative. It's about understanding that premature revelation of information can neutralize its power. This is why Scorpios are often described as secretive or mysterious. But it's not that they're hiding things for the sake of hiding them. They're protecting their strategic advantage. They're maintaining their ability to act decisively when the moment is right. They're ensuring that they can't be easily predicted, controlled, or neutralized by others. And this connects directly to one of Scorpio's most valuable traits in the modern world. Their ability to operate in crisis. When everything falls apart. When systems collapse. When the comfortable illusions can no longer be maintained. Scorpio doesn't panic. Scorpio activates. Because Scorpio has already been to the underworld. They've already faced their own psychological death. They've already survived what most people spend their entire lives avoiding. So when external crisis arrives, they're not shocked or overwhelmed. They're in their element. This is the territory they know intimately. This is why you often find Scorpios thriving in professions that others find too intense, too dark, or too emotionally demanding. Emergency medicine, trauma therapy, criminal investigation, crisis management, hospice care. These aren't just career choices for Scorpio. These are callings that align with their fundamental nature. They're drawn to the places where life and death intersect, where truth can no longer be avoided, where pretense becomes impossible. And here's what's fascinating from a psychological perspective. While most people need to build up resilience to handle these intense environments, Scorpios often need to learn how to function in normal, everyday situations. The small talk, the surface level pleasantries, the social rituals that don't serve any deeper purpose. These are the things that exhaust Scorpio, not the profound emotional intensity that exhausts everyone else. Have you ever felt completely drained after a social event where nothing real was discussed? Where everyone maintained their polite masks and avoided any topic of actual substance? That's what daily life feels like for Scorpio. It's not that they can't do it. They're often remarkably skilled at social performance when necessary. But it costs them enormous energy because they're constantly operating against their natural frequency. This brings us to something critical that needs to be understood about Scorpio's relationship with vulnerability. There's a common misconception that Scorpios are closed off, that they don't share, that they're emotionally unavailable. But this is a fundamental misreading of what's actually happening. Scorpios are incredibly vulnerable. They feel everything with devastating intensity. They're acutely aware of every emotional nuance, every potential betrayal, every way they could be hurt. The difference is that they're extremely selective about who gets access to that vulnerability, and they have every reason to be. When you feel things as deeply as Scorpio does, when you love as completely as Scorpio loves, when you trust as absolutely as Scorpio trusts, the potential for devastation is exponentially higher. A betrayal that might be a disappointment for another sign becomes a soul-shattering event for Scorpio. A rejection that might sting for a few weeks can send Scorpio into a complete psychological reconstruction that lasts years. So Scorpio develops what appears to be armor. What looks like emotional unavailability. What seems like trust issues. But it's not armor in the traditional sense. It's a highly sophisticated filtering system. Scorpio isn't trying to keep everyone out. They're trying to identify the rare individuals who are capable of meeting them at their depth. Who won't weaponize, i.e. their vulnerability. Who can handle the intensity of genuine intimacy. And this is where we need to talk about Scorpio's legendary loyalty. When Scorpio decides you're trustworthy. When you pass through their filtering system. When they choose to let you into their inner world. You receive a level of loyalty that's almost unmatched in the Zodiac. Scorpio will go to war for the people they love. They will sacrifice enormously. They will stand by you when everyone else walks away. They will see you through your darkest moments without flinching. But here's the other side of that coin. If you betray a Scorpio's trust, if you prove yourself unworthy of the vulnerability they offered you, you don't just lose their loyalty, you become dead to them. And I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean they can completely sever the emotional connection with a finality that shocks people who don't understand Scorpio energy. This isn't cruelty. This isn't vindictiveness. Though it can certainly look that way from the outside. This is self-preservation. Scorpio knows that they cannot afford to maintain connections with people who have proven themselves unsafe. Because unlike other signs who might be able to maintain casual friendships with former intimate partners or people who hurt them, Scorpio doesn't do casual. Every connection either deepens or it ends. There's no middle ground. Let me give you a specific example of how this plays out. Imagine a Scorpio who has spent years building a deep friendship with someone. They've shared their authentic self, revealed their vulnerabilities, offered their complete trust. Then that friend betrays them in some significant way. Maybe they share a secret that was told in confidence. Maybe they side with someone who hurt the Scorpio. Maybe they prove themselves to be fundamentally different from who the Scorpio thought they were. What happens next often confuses people. The Scorpio doesn't create drama. They don't seek revenge in the obvious sense. They simply close the door. Completely. Permanently. They remove that person from their life with surgical precision. And they do it so thoroughly that it's as if the relationship never existed. This is Scorpio's famous stings. But it's not about hurting the other person. It's about protecting themselves from further damage. Does this seem extreme to you? It might, if you don't understand the level of investment Scorpio puts into their relationships. For Scorpio, every genuine connection represents an enormous risk. They're not just sharing their time or their company. They're sharing their soul. And when that gift is mishandled, the only rational response is complete withdrawal. Now, let's talk about something that makes Scorpio particularly powerful in the current global moment. Their relationship with transformation and crisis. We're living in a time of unprecedented change. Systems that seemed permanent are collapsing. Certainties that people built their lives around are dissolving. The comfortable illusions that allowed people to avoid difficult truths are becoming impossible to maintain. For most people, this is terrifying. The ground is shifting beneath their feet. The future is uncertain. The old maps no longer work. But for Scorpio, this is familiar territory. This is the space where they've always lived. The space between death and rebirth. The space where transformation isn't optional. It's inevitable. Scorpios have been preparing for this moment their entire lives. Even if they didn't know it consciously. Every time they've had to completely rebuild themselves. Every time they've faced their shadow and integrated it. Every time they've chosen truth over comfort. All of that has been training for exactly this kind of collective transformation. And this is why Scorpio energy is becoming increasingly valuable and increasingly visible in our culture. We need people who can navigate the underworld. We need people who aren't afraid of what's hidden. We need people who can facilitate the kind of deep, Uncomfortable transformation that's required for genuine evolution. Think about the Scorpio qualities that are most needed right now. The ability to see through deception and manipulation. The courage to speak uncomfortable truths. The capacity to hold space for intense emotions without trying to fix or suppress them. The willingness to completely dismantle broken systems rather than trying to reform them. The understanding that sometimes things need to die before something new can be born. These aren't comfortable qualities. They're not pleasant or easy. But they're absolutely essential for the kind of collective transformation we're moving through. And Scorpios, whether they're conscious of it or not, are often the ones facilitating this transformation in their families, their workplaces, their communities. But here's what's crucial to understand. This role comes with a cost. Being the one who sees what others don't want to see, who speaks what others don't want to hear, who facilitates changes that others resist, is exhausting and often thankless. Scorpios frequently find themselves in the position of being the catalyst for transformation in other people's lives, only to be blamed or rejected once that transformation becomes uncomfortable. This is the Scorpio paradox. They're often most valuable precisely when they're most unwelcome. The truth teller is rarely popular. The person who refuses to participate in collective denial is often ostracized. The one who insists on depth in a culture that prefers superficiality is frequently labeled as too intense, too much, too difficult. Have you experienced this? Have you been told you're too deep, too serious, too intense? Have you been made to feel like there's something wrong with you for wanting substance, for refusing to engage in meaningless small talk, for insisting on authenticity in your relationships? You're tapping into Scorpio energy, whether you have Scorpio placements in your chart or not. And what you need to understand is that there's nothing wrong with you. You're not too much. You're not too intense. You're operating at a frequency that most people haven't developed the capacity to match. And that's not your problem to fix. This brings us to one of the most important lessons Scorpio teaches us. The difference between loneliness and solitude. Scorpios often spend significant periods of their lives alone. Not because they can't form connections, but because they refuse to settle for connections that don't meet their standards for depth and authenticity. This is a choice that requires enormous courage in a culture that pathologizes being alone. We're constantly told that we need to be social, that we need to have large friend groups, that being alone means something is wrong with us. But Scorpio understands something profound. Being alone is infinitely preferable to being with people who don't truly see you, who can't meet you at your depth, who require you to diminish yourself to make them comfortable. Solitude, for Scorpio, isn't isolation, it's protection. It's preservation of their energy and their authenticity. It's a refusal to waste their precious life force on connections that don't nourish their soul. And it's during these periods of solitude that Scorpio often does their most important work. The deep psychological excavation, the shadow integration, the complete reconstruction of self. But here's what's important. This solitude isn't permanent. Scorpio isn't a hermit by nature. They're incredibly relational beings who crave deep intimacy. The solitude is a phase, a necessary retreat that allows them to shed old skin and prepare for the next level of engagement. And when they emerge from these periods of withdrawal, they're fundamentally different. More powerful, more authentic, more aligned with their truth. This cyclical pattern of engagement, withdrawal, transformation, and re-emergence is core to Scorpio's nature. They don't grow linearly like some signs. They grow in spirals, in cycles, in waves. They go deep. They integrate. They emerge transformed. Then the cycle begins again at a higher level of consciousness. And this is why trying to rush a Scorpio through their process is not only ineffective, it's potentially damaging. When Scorpio withdraws, when they go silent, when they seem to disappear into themselves, they're not being difficult or dramatic. They're doing essential work that can't be done while maintaining their normal level of external engagement. They're in the cocoon. And you cannot rush the metamorphosis without destroying what's being created. Let me share something about Scorpio's relationship with power that often gets overlooked. Scorpios are not interested in power for its own sake. They're not interested in status or recognition or external validation. What they're interested in is agency, the ability to shape their own reality, the capacity to protect themselves and the people they love, the freedom to live according to their own will rather than someone else's expectations. This is why Scorpios often reject traditional paths to power. They're not interested in climbing corporate ladders or accumulating impressive titles if those things require them to compromise their authenticity or submit to systems they don't respect. They'd rather have less obvious power that allows them to maintain their integrity than more visible power that requires them to sell out. But make no mistake, Scorpios accumulate power. They just do it differently. They accumulate knowledge. They develop skills. They build networks of genuine relationships based on mutual respect and shared values. They position themselves strategically, and they do all of this quietly, without fanfare, without drawing unnecessary attention. This is why Scorpios are often underestimated until the moment they choose to act. People mistake their quietness for weakness, their selectivity for inability, their strategic patience for passivity. And then they're shocked when the Scorpio demonstrates capabilities that were completely invisible until that moment. This strategic invisibility is one of Scorpio's most sophisticated tools, and it connects directly to something we need to discuss about Scorpio's relationship with revenge. Yes, let's address the elephant in the room. Scorpio has a reputation for being vengeful, for never forgetting a wrong, for plotting elaborate retribution. And there's truth in this reputation, but not in the way most people understand it. Here's what's actually happening. Scorpio has an extraordinary memory for emotional truth. They remember not just what happened, but how it felt, what it meant, what it revealed about someone's character, and they don't forget. Not because they're holding grudges in the petty sense, but because they're maintaining an accurate database of who people actually are versus who they pretend to be. When Scorpio acts on this information, when they respond to past betrayals or wrongs, it's not impulsive, it's not emotional in the reactive sense. It's calculated, it's strategic, and it's often so delayed that the person on the receiving end doesn't even connect their current consequences to their past actions. This is the real Scorpio revenge. Not dramatic confrontations or obvious retaliation, but the quiet, patient repositioning of pieces on the chessboard until the person who wronged them finds themselves naturally experiencing the consequences of their own choices. But here's what mature Scorpios eventually learn. The best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's transformation. It's using the energy that could go into retaliation and channeling it into becoming so powerful, so successful, so aligned with their truth that the person who hurt them becomes completely irrelevant. This is the ultimate Scorpio power move. Not destroying your enemies, but transcending them so completely that they cease to matter. And this brings us to something profound about Scorpio's evolutionary journey. Every Scorpio is on a path from the scorpion to the eagle to the phoenix. The scorpion represents the reactive, defensive, potentially destructive expression of Scorpio energy. The eagle represents the evolved Scorpio who is learning to use their power with wisdom and perspective. And the phoenix represents the fully transformed Scorpio who has mastered the art of death and rebirth, who can facilitate transformation not just in themselves but in entire systems. Most Scorpios will move through all three phases multiple times in their lives. They'll have periods where they're operating from Scorpion energy, using their power defensively or destructively. They'll have periods of eagle consciousness, where they're able to see the bigger picture and use their gifts for healing and transformation. And they'll have phoenix moments, where they rise from complete destruction into something entirely new and more powerful than before. The key is recognizing which phase you're in and being honest about it. A Scorpio operating from Scorpion energy who pretends they're at eagle consciousness is dangerous, both to themselves and others. But a Scorpio who can acknowledge where they are and consciously work toward evolution is unstoppable. Now let's talk about something that's rarely discussed but absolutely crucial to understanding Scorpio: their relationship with sexuality and life force energy. Scorpio rules the 8th house, which governs not just sex but all forms of deep merging, resource sharing, and energetic exchange. And Scorpio's connection to sexual energy isn't about promiscuity or obsession in the shallow sense. It's about understanding that sexual energy is life force energy, and life force energy is power. Scorpios intuitively understand what many spiritual traditions teach explicitly. That's sexual energy, when properly understood and channeled, is one of the most potent forces available to human beings. It's creative power in its rawest form. It's the energy that literally creates life, and it can be used for physical creation, artistic creation, spiritual transformation, or personal empowerment. This is why Scorpios often have complex relationships with sexuality. They're not interested in casual encounters that are purely physical. They're interested in the kind of sexual connection that creates genuine energetic exchange, that facilitates transformation, that allows for complete vulnerability and merging. For Scorpio, is a spiritual practice whether they frame it that way or not. It's a portal to the kind of depth and intensity they crave in all areas of life. But this also means that sexual betrayal hits Scorpio differently than it hits other signs. It's not just about broken trust or wounded ego. It's about violation of the sacred. It's about someone taking the profound gift of their sexual energy and treating it carelessly. This is why Scorpios can be so intense about fidelity and sexual boundaries. They're not being controlling or possessive in the shallow sense. They're protecting something they consider sacred. And this connects to a broader truth about Scorpio. Everything they do with a sense of sacredness. Their work becomes a calling. Their relationships become soul contracts. Their personal growth becomes a spiritual practice. They don't know how to engage with life superficially because they're wired to find the deeper meaning, the hidden significance, the transformative potential in everything. This is both their gift and their burden. The gift is that they experience life with a richness and depth that most people never access. The burden is that they can never just relax into the surface of things. They can never be satisfied with easy answers or comfortable illusions. They're compelled to dig deeper, to question further, to transform more completely. Have you felt this compulsion? This inability to accept things at face value? This need to understand the deeper truth beneath every situation, every relationship, every experience? This is Scorpio consciousness, and it's both exhausting and exhilarating. Let me tell you something about Scorpio that might surprise you. Despite their reputation for darkness and intensity, Scorpios are often the most hopeful people you'll meet. Not naive hope, not blind optimism, but the kind of hope that comes from having survived multiple deaths and rebirths. The kind of hope that understands that no matter how dark things get, transformation is always possible. That nothing is permanent. That even the most broken things can be remade into something beautiful. This is why Scorpios are so good at holding space for other people's darkness. They're not afraid of your shadow because they've integrated their own. They're not shocked by your worst moments because they've survived their own. They can sit with you in your deepest pain without trying to fix it or make it better because they understand that sometimes you have to feel it fully before you can transform it. And this is perhaps Scorpio's greatest gift to the world. The capacity to be with what is, no matter how uncomfortable or painful, without flinching. The willingness to look directly at what everyone else is avoiding. The courage to name what's true even when that truth is devastating. Because Scorpio understands that you cannot heal what you won't acknowledge. You cannot transform what you refuse to see. You cannot evolve beyond what you're unwilling to face. This is why Scorpios often end up being the truth tellers in their families and communities. Not because they enjoy conflict or drama, but because they literally cannot participate in collective denial. When everyone is pretending everything is fine, Scorpio is the one who says, actually, nothing is fine and we need to talk about it. When everyone is maintaining comfortable lies, Scorpio is the one who insists on uncomfortable truth. And yes, this makes them unpopular. Yes, this gets them labeled as negative or difficult or too intense. But it also makes them essential. Because without people willing to speak truth, without people willing to face shadow, without people willing to facilitate necessary destruction so that new creation can occur, we all stay stuck in patterns that no longer serve us. Now, let's talk about what Scorpios need to thrive. First and foremost, they need permission to be intense. They need to stop apologizing for their depth, their passion, their refusal to engage superficially. They need to understand that their intensity is not a flaw to be fixed, but a feature to be honored. The world doesn't need more shallow people. It needs more people willing to go deep. Second, Scorpios need relationships that can match their depth. Not everyone needs to be capable of this, but they need at least a few people in their lives who can meet them in the underworld, who aren't afraid of their intensity, who can handle the full force of their love and loyalty without trying to diminish it or control it. Third, Scorpios need work that matters. They cannot thrive in meaningless jobs or superficial careers. They need to feel like what they're doing has genuine impact, that it's facilitating real transformation, that it's contributing to something larger themselves. This doesn't mean they all need to be therapists or healers in the traditional sense. But whatever they do, it needs to have depth and significance. Fourth, Scorpios need regular periods of solitude for integration and transformation. They need to stop feeling guilty about their need to withdraw, to go silent, to disappear into themselves for periods of time. This isn't antisocial behavior. This is essential maintenance. This is how they process and prepare for their next level of engagement. And finally, Scorpios need to learn to trust their own power. So many Scorpios, especially those who have been hurt or betrayed, learn to suppress their intensity, to hide their power, to make themselves smaller to make others comfortable. But this is a betrayal of their essential nature. The world needs their power, not the destructive expression of it, but the transformative expression. The power that heals, the power that reveals truth, the power that facilitates necessary change. If you're a Scorpio or you have significant Scorpio placements in your chart, I want you to hear this clearly. Your intensity is not too much. Your depth is not a problem. Your refusal to engage superficially is not a character flaw. You are operating at a frequency that most people haven't developed the capacity to match, and that's not your responsibility to fix. Your responsibility is to find the people, the work, the environments that can handle your full power, to stop diminishing yourself for the comfort of others, to trust that your gifts, as intense and uncomfortable as they might be, are exactly what the world needs right now. And if you're not a Scorpio, but you have Scorpios in your life, understand this. They're not trying to be difficult. They're not trying to make things complicated. They're simply incapable of engaging with life at a superficial level. If you want genuine relationship with a Scorpio, you need to be willing to go deep. You need to be willing to be real. You need to be willing to face uncomfortable truths. And you need to understand that their intensity, their loyalty, their transformative power is a gift, even when it's challenging. The world is entering a period of profound transformation. Old systems are collapsing. Comfortable illusions are dissolving. The shadow that humanity has been avoiding is becoming impossible to ignore. And in this moment, Scorpio energy is not just valuable, it's essential. We need people who can navigate the underworld. We need people who aren't afraid of death and rebirth. We need people who can hold space for the kind of deep, uncomfortable transformation that's required for genuine evolution. Scorpio has been training for this moment their entire lives. Every death they've survived, every shadow they've integrated, every time they've chosen truth over comfort. All of it has been preparation for exactly this kind of collective transformation. And whether they're conscious of it or not, Scorpios are the ones who will guide us through this passage. Not because they're special or chosen, but because they're the ones who have already been where